Dr. Rod Berger. How you doing, man?
I'm well, Rich. Nice to spend some time with you today.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story about storytelling. I think that's a very valuable thing for creatives and the creative community as a whole to be able to let people get insight into who they are outside of just their artwork. I think it's a very valuable asset.
Completely agree. Yeah, I think the challenge in the creative space is that balance between keeping my story going or understanding my role in my story and also giving into whatever creative work you're doing,
Yeah.
right? And that how authentic are we being if we can be based on the projects or the efforts that we have? Because we know it when we're in the zone, right? I don't care what you do creatively. You know when you're there and you're not even thinking about what you're having to do because you're in your lane, right? And then there are creative elements that you think, oh, this is not exactly what I want to be doing, but it's a part of the bigger picture.
For sure. Let me give the audience a brief introduction here for you
All right.
before we dive into the full conversation and walk through your story. You are a prolific storyteller and interview. You've conducted over 4,000 interviews for outlets like Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, and Los Angeles Magazine, capturing stories that reach audiences around the globe. You completed a BA in psychology from Michigan State University and then completed your doctorate in clinical psychology from Phillips Graduate University. You're an author. Your new book, The Narrative Edge: Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment, distills the art and science of storytelling in practical tools for leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives. As an inquisitive interviewer, you've drawn out stories from Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, Sammy Hagar, United Nations officials, Pope Francis, and the Crown Princess of Sweden, and you've documented powerful narratives in refugee camps across Africa. You're also a trusted guide to the power of story, a longtime Vanderbilt University guest lecturer, editor, creative coach, and keynote speaker with 350,000 plus social followers and a TV development deal with the Jim Henson Company. And you show people how storytelling becomes a real world currency for connection, impact, and opportunity. That is quite a lot of question and answering going on in your
Makes me
story.
feel old, Rich.
Hey, age is relative.
It is. It is.
It's all a state of mind, really. As we talked a little bit beforehand, you've listened to a few of these episodes that I've done, and I don't have a whole lot of structure other than my first question, which just takes us back in time to where were you born and what was life like as a kid for Rod?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Dayton, Ohio, but we were only there for a year. My father worked for General Motors, so we moved up to the Detroit area when I was about one. So I couldn't really take you around Dayton, Ohio.
You're right.
I'd be visiting myself. I would be a tourist. Yeah, life for me. Look, my I write about it in the book, but my late father grew up in Germany during World War II. He was much older as a father, so it was a very, sort of a strict, organized environment in that manner. But he traveled for work all the time, so you know, my life ebbed and flowed between when he was home and what that did to the house or to the sort of the home environment. And then when he wasn't there because he was traveling for work, played sports like crazy, started working when I was 14 and, odd jobs as kids get. And so pretty typical living in the suburbs, trying to find your way, trying to figure out what's important, what's not important. I always because my father was much older, I gravitated towards my teachers and older students, like just people that were older than me that I would connect with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really kind of my thing. We did one sister and who's just it's about a year difference, younger than me.
Okay.
So small family in that regard, right? So we didn't have
Yeah.
a lot of cousins and these sorts of things. So it was just sort of me and my activities and in the Detroit area.
Yeah. What was your mom stay-at-home mom?
I'd say yes and no, right? Odd jobs here and there, different careers bouncing, but primarily I would say that would have been the focus. Yeah.
Main focus. Okay.
Hmm.
So then grandparents too were not a real.
On my mother's side, yeah, in Indiana, my grandfather died when I was like 14, 15, something like that.
Okay.
My grandmother on that side lived till she was in her late 90s. So she was around. And then my father's parents, my father's dad died way before I was born. And I met my grandmother one time when I was 9 when we went over there. So no connection at all. It might as well have been someone you meet at a restaurant. There's no,
Right, right.
yeah.
Short conversation.
And language was I didn't speak German and she was incredibly old. So
Got you. Got you. That must have been very interesting as a child, meeting your grandmother who you literally cannot communicate with, but yet you're trying to feel out that connection, knowing that she is the grandmother, right?
yeah, I guess part of that, but I think being 9 years old, being able to go to Europe was, of course, that was not everybody would get that opportunity. So I think it was more just the entire experience of being able to go over there
Uh,
before you're even 10 years old. I don't think I worried too much. I think she probably just scared me more than anything, just because, when
yeah.
just that stoicism, right? And not knowing what people are saying around you because they're speaking a different language. But that's also because, I've learned a lot because of my travels to the Nordics, and in this, you start to learn about people where some cultures are incredibly affectionate and communicative, and family is just like the nucleus of everything. But if you
Right.
don't grow up in that regard, then the stories that don't have those elements, right? It's like an ingredient or something in a meal. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't coming from an origin of sort of family rituals and, maybe let's say Sunday dinners and these sorts of things,
Right.
with big families, members and participants and all that sort of thing. So going across the ocean and sitting across from someone that doesn't speak to you because they just don't speak your language and they're very old and maybe not in the best health, it
Mhm.
didn't register for me the way it might have,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
because that's kind of what I knew.
Yeah. D- Were you intrigued by the visual of being over there? The town, the cultural,
Oh yeah,
scenic landscape?
absolutely. Because, and I talk about this in my book, I think I didn't know it until really adulthood, but my curiosity in storytelling, I think, really originated from my dad, and not that he was a storyteller, but quite the opposite. It was the not knowing, it was the sealing off of narrative
Okay.
that made me curious. Because, you tell a child no, or you ignore them when they want something, they just become that much more interested. And so
Right.
when he would come back from a trip when I was a kid, I would always want to run into the room while he's unpacking and I think, hope that maybe he would share something because he went off to these far off lands that I never had exposure to. And yet he wouldn't share anything.
Yeah.
And so then you just become more curious and more interested. And so that being 9 at that time going over there, I just think it added to it's like the ambiance of somewhere where you just sort of, you're trying to soak it all in. And it's, you inflate your experience of it. It's even that much better and brighter and more exciting just because you just don't know so much that you fill in with your imagination, especially as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Was your dad a executive at GM? Is that why there was so much
Yeah,
travel?
it was kind of a one of one job. He was the head of incentive travel. Back then they would, if you had people, that owned the dealerships or whatever around the world, and they would have things where they'd bring the top, whatever to some random place on planet Earth, and he would be in charge of everything regarding that event. Or if they were the main sponsor for the Indianapolis 500 and the pace car, he would be the one dealing with all of those details. And maybe there would be someone famous that would be speaking to people, and so the
Okay.
detailed German in him did quite well in a job that he had to be incredibly detailed to succeed in.
Very fascinating. My dad was a mechanic, and him and my mom came up here in the 60s from East Tennessee because of the auto industry. And it was interesting growing up that I didn't have a whole lot of that communication either. A lot of it was me being inquisitive, trying to watch what he's doing on the car and find out how can I do that. And one of the responses that I got from him, if I would ask him to show me something, he would be telling me, I've got to get this finished and it'll be faster if I just do it myself. So let me keep working here.
Right.
So I understand that a little bit. And he wasn't a real talker in general. He was more quiet, didn't say a whole lot unless, it needed to be said. So I totally get that perspective of trying to be inquisitive, trying to get information, and you're just piecemealed it out.
Yeah, you're kind of left hanging, right? That's when you start to fill in the blanks. Like, where did you go? What did you do? Like, you just start to figure out. And then you put yourself, I think, in that story too. Like, oh, wow, and then you potentially develop some level of pride in what they do because then it becomes even that much more exciting.
Yeah.
Which is probably why I love travel so much. I have no doubt I would be sort of foolish to think that my love of travel does not come from just understanding how methodical he was in the way in which he would prepare for his travel and where he would go. And I have no doubt that if he hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't know any different and wouldn't approach travel in the same way that I have over the course of my life.
When you came back from that trip at 9, how did that maybe change your perspective of coming back to elementary school and going back into class and interacting with students at that point?
I don't know. I don't know how it would have. I don't know how it impacted. I'm sure that it did, but I do know that it just made me even that much more curious, like wanting to know a story. Because since he grew up, so for those that have family or had family that is deceased now that grew up during that time and on the continent of World War II in that manner, there were a lot of secrets, right? There were a lot of things that were not shared, and so that just sort of, I think, illuminates or provide some jet fuel to one's curiosity, because there's a reason that things aren't shared for what everyone has whether it was what they witnessed or when they found out what was going on, like all these sorts of things. And so I think that there was just this air of, you almost don't want to acknowledge you were even there. And so I think it's a mix of feeling even more pride for a parent that survived that world, but you still have very little answers. So coming back from a trip like that, I just know that I had even more questions than I had before going on that trip.
Yeah, I get it. Totally get it. Being in class, were you more of a student that wanted to sit towards the back and still just observe and listen? Or did you have an interest in being up front so that you could get noticed or just be closer to the information?
It's a good question, Rich. I mean, I think back to sort of, it is interesting to think, where do people sit in the life of the classroom of life? So I would say that I was probably more in the sort of the 3/4 to the back, not in the way back, right? That the kid that, if he felt a little bit more connected maybe, or maybe enjoyed school a little bit more, maybe I would have sat a little closer to the front, right? But yeah, I was sort of, out of 5 rows of desks, I'm in that 3rd to 4th row going back, but wanting to participate in school. I could sort of succeed at school, but it didn't mean that it came easy for me.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So there's some of those, some kids, they can just right out of the gate, but that was never me. I had to work for it. I definitely had to work for it. Now, the thing is, when you're a kid and you're in that 3rd or 4th row in a classroom, I guess one benefit to some degree is that I've read about this too. I'm a big fan of the visual of like an elevator stopping between 2 floors, right? There's part of you that can connect with the kids at the front that are participating, raising their hands. But there's also that sensibility that says, I just don't feel like participating today. And so I'd rather lean back a little bit and into the energy that is the backstop of that last row. But in doing so, you really get to observe,
Yeah.
because people pay attention to what are kids not doing in the back potentially, right? But they're also then dealing with and addressing and meeting the needs of those in the front that are very active and engaged in their learning process.
Yeah. Did you have many friends that you would connect with in elementary school? Or was it a select few?
So in general, just across school for me, K through 12, I was much more on the smaller group of friends than I was the massive group. You know, I did have friends and people that I knew that had what felt like a million friends. You know, they'd rather have a lot, you know, several groups of friends that the relationships aren't terribly deep.
Right.
I'm of the other side of the coin, right? It was that's fine if I have a few that I'm very close with. But I was active in sports and in clubs, and I did get good grades. So I was in all kinds of different groups in that regard. I wasn't just one thing. Now, that can be hard when you're a kid because you just don't know which basically table to sit at during lunch, because you connect with kids that are in band and you connect with the athletes because you play in the school sport. You know, you've made the teams. So I was a little bit of a, you know, of my, in my own way, a little bit of a renaissance man in that regard. I just wasn't a classic this or that. And I don't think that, I think today for kids, they're much more like that than maybe we were growing up. I felt like when we were growing up, if this was sort of your group or you were known as this or that, then you just kind of stayed there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I talk about in the book that this young man that I don't know if he befriended me or I befriended him, but, you know, I would have lunch with him on Tuesdays. He had cerebral palsy and he had a massive impact on me. And that was just one example of the rotatingness, this revolving door or seat, or, you know, in lunch that really symbolized sort of my approach to friendships. But I also lived a childhood where I was much more serious. I never, and it's a derivative or a byproduct of my older father, who was much more intense, was that I didn't goof off like a typical kid. You know, I didn't laugh at the same things. I didn't, you know, the comedies that maybe kids were watching and finding just hysterical and that they were memorizing the lines. Like, it didn't hit for me because my life felt a lot more serious.
Okay.
And so I would pay, like, the one thing we would watch would be, we'd watch 60 Minutes, even as a young kid. So I was learning about all kinds of things around the planet,
Right. Yeah.
like really heavy stuff. And I enjoyed that, and a lot because I think I have a proclivity for like history and enjoying those stories, but also because, you know, if your parent is expressing their interest in you around a certain activity, you're probably going to enjoy that activity.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and so it's kind of tough to sit there and watch like some interview with Mike Wallace and, you know, some dictator on a Sunday evening and then go to school the next morning and where kids are joking around and throwing spitballs or something. Like, it just,
Yeah.
that's a bridge too far, you know?
The friend that you had with cerebral palsy, what was that impact that you're talking about there? How did that relationship and sings, and the reason I'm asking this is because I had a disabled girl in one of my elementary classes, and I always felt like I needed to make sure that someone was helping her in some way because she was in a wheelchair always. And so I had this kind of empathy as a young kid, knowing the fact that she couldn't do the same thing everybody else did, but also too wanting to make sure that she felt somewhat included as much as she probably felt excluded.
Yeah.
Was that a similar scenario of what you were seeing with this friend based on his disability, or was it just a connection that was just a true human to human connection?
I mean, it was that for sure. Like, some things you just can't, I don't know. Sometimes you just can't explain things about your own personality. You just sort of go, I don't know where the origin is or where that branch sort of originated from, but having an an eye towards justice and fairness
Okay.
and inclusion have always just been a part of me, like
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
Even as for whatever reason. And that still sort of rages inside me today, where if I see something that's going on that just feels outright unfair to another human being, like I'm ready to step in and support that person that's being marginalized. Not saying that this young man was being marginalized at all. It was just that I would find myself getting in situations where maybe a teacher would say, "Hey, could you spend some time with this other classmate?" I guess that there was some trust that I could maybe be mature enough to get to know them and become a friend, right? And so that was a little bit with regards to that. But he taught me so much, right? His life changed in a nanosecond during birth, where oxygen was cut off, and his life was forever sort of on a different trajectory. But he was one of the happiest, most loving humans I'd ever met, and just the enthusiasm for life and for every breath. I mean, he just exuded that. And so that was really nice. That was a gift that he was given to me. So
Yeah.
while people might have thought I was giving some gift, but I don't even know what that would be, just because I was able-bodied and of able mind in some way that we would deem as some ridiculous definition of what normal or expected is.
Yeah.
He was so much more human than the humans that I knew in a lot of ways, because he could celebrate the smallest of wins in ways that just you couldn't help but smile. And so that was a fantastic lesson that I don't know if I knew in the moment. It was clear to some degree, but you take that and you say, I'm going to chalk that up as you want more of those, I think, experiences in life over time. You don't want less of them.
Yeah.
The less, those are easy to find. The cynics, the people that, just they only care about sort of their own plot of land in this world. And so that feels good to have an impact. It's probably one of the greatest things that we can experience as a human. And if we do it where it's not selfish, right? If we know that we are a part of somebody's story in that moment,
Right.
and we've reflected that and their experience back to them authentically, man, does that just, I think, supercharge the human spirit.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. At what age did you start playing sports?
Sports came early for me. My father played what I would call like semi-professional soccer over in Europe. So I was going to be playing soccer whether I liked it or not.
Right.
Yeah, very young. Sports was a huge part of my life, whether I played it or I followed it. I mean, look, sports in a lot of ways parented me when I didn't have guidance.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of things, when you write a book, you sort of have to open your mind up to everything.
Yeah.
And start to see where things free associate and start to align and sort of create combinations you hadn't thought of, because, wow, these are lessons that seem to be all in one bucket. Let me understand that a little bit more.
Right.
But sports meant so much to me, and my team still to this day do, that, all the like posters that I would have, or the front page of the Detroit Free Press when my Pistons would win or whatever, they were all on my ceiling, not on the walls.
Hey. Okay.
Because to me, I had great pride in that. Like when I would close my eyes and I'm looking at greatness.
For sure.
And so that was like the last thing I wanted to see, especially in a world that felt confusing. Because when you're a kid that feels like you're having to live older than your age,
Yeah.
you're looking for things that sort of ease that pressure, because you don't have the emotional sort of building blocks yet to understand how to navigate a world where you're probably more comfortable with adults than you even are your own sort of contemporary,
Yeah.
students and teammates and the like. So yeah, sports played a massive role for me. Huge. And to this day.
Did you play multiple, or was soccer your main?
Soccer and basketball were my
Same here.
were my absolute love. And then you become a parent and you see your kids playing those sports, and it's even more exciting, I think, than when you think back to when you yourself played, right? So that's just this sort of gift that you never know, right? I mean, I'm lucky. I have plenty of friends who've had kids that are different than they were growing up. I have a buddy of mine who was a big, massive sports fan, played all the sports, and yet, his son could care less about sports and is the least active kid you would know. And so I know that in that regard, I'm very lucky that I get to that story thread continues for me. Right? It hasn't stopped. It's not that we're going to put that up on the shelf and then we're just going to open up a different book. So it is what it is. And if I had had kids that didn't enjoy those things, then I probably wouldn't even give it a thought. But I do because I get to see it firsthand, and I know what that's like, and I understand sort of the battle within the lines and what that does to you, and whether you're growing at the same rate as your teammates, and I mean just all kinds of stuff that help form you, I think, in lots of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying about, you know, having to act older than what you actually are as a young kid. My parents always kind of, in, I don't know if it's encouragement or it's just what they wanted, but they always wanted me to, be quiet, be contained, don't get out of hand, sit still, you know, sit right here, don't act up. All of those prompts that you would get wherever you were going. And also, too, because them kind of being the only ones up here from down south, they didn't have a whole lot of family that was here. When they first came here, my dad's sister and brother-in-law were stationed at Selfridge. So that was a connection that they had in the beginning. And then his youngest brother had come up here as well, just because he was a mechanic too. So you have two mechanics, and then you got somebody stationed at Selfridge. And it was a strange interaction because I didn't really see my aunt and uncle in those first few years. My mom and dad interacted more with some neighbors that we had, and they kind of looked at my mom and dad like family, and they would, babysit me and everything. So it was kind of like we ended up evolving into their family, and they lived out in New Haven. We always went to their house for, special events and stuff. And they were all older. All the younger kids were older. And, they looked at me as like this little kid that they had to just kind of bounce and bop around kind of a thing. But I never had anybody that I could really interact with. I had to just kind of sit and observe all the adults, what they were doing. And they were a German family as well. Last name was Durst. They owned a house moving company where they would literally take the house up off of.
Oh, literally.
Yeah, this is back 60s, 70s. So they were literal house movers. So they would take a house from Detroit, have it on, a semi truck, and drive it up the road to, at that time, area at around M59 was. Do you remember the Mount Clemens drive-in?
I don't, but that doesn't mean anything. I don't.
You know where M59
I
gets into?
do. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so that area,
That
back
area.
then,
Yeah.
all farmland. It wasn't built up like it is now. So they would be moving those houses from Detroit into that area. So I had to learn to navigate in an adult world almost from the beginning. And the friends that I did have from school, I wasn't really allowed to go to their house or hang around them or anything because there was only a certain amount of distance that I could go outside of my house on our street. Could go as far as this light pole, as far as this one over here. So it was confined to being a kid in an adult world and trying to figure out, like, how do I interact? How do I
You feel a little
connect?
bit like you're between two worlds, right?
Yeah, the entire time.
I know that. I know.
And even the aspect of playing sports, my parents pulled me out of public school for fourth grade and put me into a private school. And the private school was a K through 12 scenario. So the athletic teams that they had, it was a kind of mashup of all of the grades. Anybody that was able to play the sport
Played the sport.
Yeah. And because I was always taller than what most kids were at my age,
You'd get selected.
I would get selected. Yeah. So I played goalie, on the soccer team, and ended up playing goalie my entire soccer career, which I stopped playing 2017. I was playing indoor and outdoor up until then. And then basketball, same scenario, because I was tall, playing on the basketball team. But again, too, it was always with older students. So still having to figure out, all right, how do I interact with these upper class students? And also, too, try to be my own age, which never really was a thing. I was never able to just be a 7-year-old.
You feel restricted.
Yeah. So I understand exactly what your storyline is, like almost mirroring in many ways. With playing the sports from your perspective, did that allow you to feel like you had a bit of community within that team while you were doing that versus what it might look like once you were back in the classroom setting?
It's a fair question. I would say that maybe the parallel in life is that just because we switch environments, and sometimes we make snap decisions because we think that's really what we need, whether it's an escape or we think it's actually a new and better direction, you still kind of find that you still operate in a very similar way. It's just maybe the background has changed, the scenery has changed, right? So yeah, I was on teams and I was on travel teams and did quite well, but I couldn't sit here and say that those teammates were friends of mine, right? I mean, I was not the one that was going to be chummy with them outside of our sport that we were dedicating, oodles of hours towards every year, because the same thing applied, right? I mean, kids are kids. And so they want to goof off, they want to do a million other things, and yet you're sure, you're in a kid body, but you're thinking much more, not even adult like. There's just it's like a, I don't even know how to describe it in that manner, right? It's a way of being that says it's much more about like, what are we here to do? And then sort of knuckling down and doing that, as opposed to being a part of a team and, want to hang out with my teammates and right. And so I think I had respect from my teammates because of how hard I played and the role that I played on the teams that I was a part of. But I also was not looking to be included socially outside of those teams, because it just kind of wasn't a part of the ethos of my family and those sorts of, like, that was an automatic. Some kids' homes are ones where kids always come over. It's sort of like the house. Well, mine was not the house in that regard, right? So I didn't approach it that way. I approached competition as what I saw in front of me. Yeah. And I was going to approach it with reckless abandon and give everything I had because I could always take a nap later.
Yeah,
right. And so I've coached my kids the same way. And yeah, so for me, it would be sort of disingenuous for me to think even in my head and say that, somehow being in sports that I loved, that changed the calculus of my interaction style, right? I was always observing, thinking about why coaches would make the decisions that they made. So I was just very analytical in that manner, like around relationships and teams or people, groups.
Yeah.
How I would fit into that. Where was my advantage in athletics? Where wasn't it? And that's the beauty, I think, of sports too, because it allows you to get some of that sort of, it's like you're like shaking out the question marks of your life, like sweat.
Yeah.
In those moments, you can just kind of feel like, all right, all these questions I've had this week are things that just they didn't make sense to me, or that felt heavy. They're out. They're on the soccer field. I left them there on Saturday afternoon, or on the basketball court on a Tuesday night, in some district final game. I mean, that's the beauty of sport. If you fully engage with it, give yourself to that commitment in that moment.
You mentioned your younger sister's about a year and a half younger than you. Did you guys have a connection, relationship wise, or was it just a realization of she's a girl, I'm a boy?
Well, she was highly committed into her world of, she's worked in the entertainment space her whole life. And so she was on that track, and the training for all of those things. I mean, that was like sort of training to be an Olympic athlete. So she was gone just as much, even if it was just 3 miles down the road for something, than my father was. So, and it's funny because if anything, that's much more like today's suburban family
Right.
than it sure was back then. So yeah, it was a significant focus of the family on her development and trajectory. And so schedules aligned to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that probably impacted, we're just very independent in the way in which we think. And that's carried through even to today, which is totally fine. I mean, again, I think we know what we know based on what we've experienced. And it doesn't mean that, some families are incredibly close and they have all these shared activities and rituals and customs, and others don't. And that doesn't mean that they're sitting there going, we wish we had it. Their comfort is maybe not someone else's comfort.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. I get that perspective as well because I have an older sister that's technically a half sister, just from my dad's first marriage. But I've never really considered her the half sister. I just considered her my sister, but she's 7 years older and she's always lived in Tennessee. So growing up, I never got to be around her much unless we were going down there. And that was just because of the custody scenario play. And then when the year I was turning 9, my parents decided we think we want to have another kid. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it now. So they had my little sister. So there's a 9 years difference between me and my little sister. So between my little sister and my older sister, there's 16. So it's like we were all born in
Like different generations.
different generations.
Yeah.
We never really had real close interaction in any way, and didn't get to have that real strong bond that you can create if your siblings are with you most of the time or close to your age at least. So I get that perspective of having sibling, but yet you're still kind of in your own world having to figure things out and wondering about things, and that observation element is always there.
Can't turn it off. It's always there.
Yeah. As you're shifting from elementary school into middle school, are you starting to see any differences take place in the way that maybe you're starting to focus on what you're studying, or the fact that you're on these travel teams and have that interaction going on? Is there anything starting to shift for you, or is it still that same continuous, I'm observing, I'm looking, I'm trying to find my spot, so to speak?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, look, middle school is the gauntlet for most, if not all, young people, right? Trying to understand just sort of who you are in a world where, wait a minute, this person, they grew 2 inches, it feels like, over summer, They look different, they sound different, all of that. Yeah, I think I was pretty much the same kind of kid, you just don't know really the challenge of middle school is it's constantly feeling, I think, for a young person, like you've walked into a room that you're not sure you're supposed to be in life. And if you are, is there a chair for you to even sit in? Just as like broad strokes, right? Because there's always this, and that's when we start to develop a relationship with insecurity of like, wait a minute, you start to judge yourself against others, or, it runs the gamut. And so, yeah, I think I was pretty similar, where sports was still my anchor.
Okay.
And, that's when I started to think about like work and things to do. And money. I mean, that's one of the biggest changes, I think, for folks, especially. I mean, I don't know if kids today are working as much as maybe we did when we were growing up,
For sure.
especially in the suburbs across the country. But yeah, that was a time where, you start, I think for most, whether you want to or not, you understand that high school is just around the corner, and things are getting a little more serious. And of course, in that sort of youthful mind, you think it's really serious. There's driving that you have to look forward to. I mean, there's just a million things that feel like substantial markers in the development of just being human. Yeah. So, I mean, that was pretty much, I mean, it really didn't change much. It really didn't.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier on that you started work at 14. Was that a choice to do that because you felt like you wanted to have your own money, or
A
was
little
that
bit,
a
a little bit.
circumstantial scenario?
No, it was more about having my own and things that I wanted to do. So I started bagging groceries at Meijer, which people
Okay.
who know in the Midwest would know Meijer.
Yeah.
Because you could be 14 at that time. I don't know how maybe it's changed, but you could actually get a job at Meijer. For those that don't know, it's like the Walmart before Walmart was Walmart, or Target before Target was Target. And so, yeah, I would work on the weekends, but I always did have for whatever reason, this sort of, work hard gene in me that I was totally fine with that. And so that was the first, but I think looking back, I mean, I had all kinds of jobs. I worked at a nursery, and I was the laborer that they would, okay, someone just bought this tree, help so-and-so out who's old enough to drive the cat and pull it out of the ground, load it into the I mean, be a dishwasher at a pizza place, work till 2 a.m. I mean, I did all of that stuff, bussing tables. I mean, it ran the gamut as you kind of go from middle school to high school. But the beauty of some of that is, yeah, it does speed up the timeline of things for you because, as an adult, time, you have a different relationship with time. You know
Right.
it's going by fast, and you have things that pull your energy in different ways. And those of us that are parents understand that completely because your life starts to revolve and then fully revolves around their schedules. But that's just sort of a natural rhythm, right? But when you're younger, I just remember time felt like it would take forever. It's just, my
Yes.
gosh, something's coming in 6 weeks. 6 weeks is like,
Ages.
right. And for us, 6 weeks is a blink.
Yeah.
You just kind of go, wait a minute, it's already been 6 weeks. I cannot
Yeah.
believe this. We're already in where we are in 2026. So yeah, I mean, work was beneficial because you learn sort of the value of money, of what hard work can yield.
Right.
But I think it was assistive because it helps to move things along a little bit faster because you truly have less idle time if you're balancing sports and a job. And so on a weekend, you're not only working your job, but you're having to go to games, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's Monday again, and you just start stacking those up, and you go, oh my goodness, now I'm a ninth grader. Now I'm a 10th grader.
Yeah.
And now I'm leaving high school, right?
Yeah. You mentioned too earlier that you had a lot of older people that made impressions on you, or essentially noticed something within you that they wanted to encourage along. How early did that start for you?
How early did that start for me?
Did it start
It
coming into
definitely
play?
started in elementary school for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I think it was probably that there was some novelty with a kid like me because I was like, not many fifth graders are like serious about things, and I was serious
Right.
about things.
Yeah.
And so I think that you would draw attention just because of that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I had it really early on. I mean, it was just one of these sort of common themes that I would have. It would be, oh, really? You want me to help out with this, I mean, because I think educators are looking for kids that you can trust and that will hopefully maybe be mature enough to handle whatever it is they're asking you to do, to go speak to younger kids or help out here or volunteer or be the example in front of the class. Well, the kid who's maybe a little bit more serious just about life, whether they like it or not, becomes kind of a benefit in that environment.
Definitely. Definitely. because they have that perspective of, I don't have to really worry a whole lot
That's right.
about what the outcome is going to be if I put some responsibility on them,
Yeah,
or if we're in a certain situation, I don't have to worry about them getting out of hand, or stepping out of line, or
that's
acting
right.
out, or any of those things. I get it.
And that's what's
So
so funny about today, because like I was like every kid in this way. I mean, you were deathly afraid of having to get up and speak or be in front of your classmates in some public way. But like the other week, I got called in and I did a whole presentation in a theater in front of like 75 fifth graders about the power of curiosity. And I love that stuff. I can't, if you would have told me back then that I could do something like that and not even sweat it, you'd go, there's just no way. why why would I do that to myself? But I love that. Anytime I get asked to volunteer or help out in something like that, I'm like, absolutely, let's do it, because I learn from it. And hopefully it's a good example for the young people that, you don't have to be so afraid of the stage, or sort of being put on notice. What's your opinion? What. But yeah, back then, no, that would not have been but I did get pulled into situations where it was, oh, he's the one that's not going to get in trouble, because I never got in trouble either. That's part of the equation. I just was not the kid that was ever going to test the limit. I had no interest, to be honest.
yeah,
Like, I just had no interest, because everything to me was much more, I'd be more worried about something I saw in 60 Minutes the night before that's going on in the world than
right,
some Yahoo in the back of the class trying to egg me on to do something that's going to get me sent to the principal's office. These
right,
are magnitudes of like idiocy that I just did not want to participate in.
yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. It was. It's always a uncomfortable scenario when you're the serious one and everybody else is trying to goof off or act up, and your mind is just in a completely different place. Like, you don't have time to goof off, because your mind is going and it's thinking of multiple things.
Now, don't get me wrong, Rich. I would say that I would, if I could do it over again. Like, I mean, why did I have to be so serious, right? Or any kid that doesn't feel like they can. There are some positive lessons in just being able to be a kid, where you
Oh, yeah,
lose track of time, and you maybe not, you don't think about the consequences in every situation. You don't overthink things. So
yeah,
trust me, I'm envious of those that I guess were given the permission structure to be who they were at the age that they were, where maybe kids like you and I weren't exactly told not to be that, but we knew implicitly sort of the mode of operation that we were to operate by, right? And
yeah,
so, yeah, I think there's probably a happy middle that you've got to find ways to help understand your own sensibilities, like what does having good character mean to you, or being there for those that may need some assistance. Or it's like, this is a random example, but at the gym this morning, there was a guy, I was on a machine and he was on the row of treadmills in front of me, and he was running quite fast, and all of a sudden you heard his phone like came out of his pocket or something and hit the treadmill and kind of flipped backwards. There were all these people around, and I'm on like a stationary bike. Nobody gets up to get this gentleman his phone, which is now in the middle of the walkway, could very easily just be walked on or
yeah,
whatever. And I got off my stationary bike, and he kind of looked at me like, wow, I just thought I was going to have to now think about this while I'm trying to just run and be in my own space. And I thought, this doesn't mean that I'm better or whatever. I just like being aware of the world around you.
right,
And I think the roots of that can be when we are young, if we're given the opportunity to explore how other people think and live and work, whether it's that young man with cerebral palsy. Having these different experiences rounds you out a little bit. So I'd say
yeah,
that'd be the one benefit of more of a serious childhood, is at least I was exposed to different things, where most of the time they were different than I would typically operate. And so maybe I'm the better and the lucky one, because I was able to soak up these experiences like you would soak up paint in a sponge or something like that.
yeah. True, very true, very true. And also too, from that perspective of what you're just talking about, your experience at the gym, that's just a simple act of kindness. And that other person may have looked at it like, whoa, this is not what I expected, because the world today is, for the most part, short on simple acts of kindness.
This is why I completely agree. This is why when I go to the grocery store, I always look at, well, I'll do it anywhere. If I'm at a restaurant, I look at someone's name tag.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a sad state because when you say, "Oh, Rich, how are you?" You're going to look at me like wide-eyed
Yeah.
because I didn't treat you like you were some robotic, extension of like, the whatever, the store, these sorts of things, right? No, you're a human, and I'm acknowledging you in that moment. And so those times, I'm never shocked by that when they give that look, but it makes me a little bit angry because I'm just thinking, just because we're in the current chapter that we're in doesn't mean that the chapter doesn't change with the turn of a page in several different instances, right? And so to either send some message that we don't care about somebody else because we're just going to ignore them, I just can't subscribe to that as a way of being. And so, yeah, I do think back to my childhood in that way and think I was probably building that muscle of awareness years earlier than I would have otherwise.
Yeah.
If I'd been a part of a bigger family, if I had, all these other things, then it might have impacted me differently.
Do you think starting working at such a young age as well put you in a different mindset of being conscious of the people that you come in contact with?
Yeah, because look, I was that kid bagging the groceries, which
Right.
is why I have more fun talking to people that bag the groceries at the grocery store.
Right.
Like there's this young man, I just know his name is Brady, and he is just this really interesting young man. And he doesn't know my name, but he knows when I show up there because I'll immediately, Brady, how we doing, man?
Yeah.
And I remind him that this is a great way to get your start. And the funny thing is, though, with every successive time that I'm there and I see him, he will add more to what he's doing and what he shares because we've created sort of that, just like it's even when we carpool with my son's soccer team and the kids. When I first started doing that, I would ask them when they'd get in the car, "How was school today?" "What?" And these kids at this age, it was like, they would sort of laugh and joke about bad grades that they got. And I would challenge them in just a sort of a fun banter way. And guess what? Now, and the one kid he's on a different team now, but when he sees me, he smiles because he knows I'm going to say, "Hey man, how's it going? How are we doing?" And his response is going to be, and it always is, it's around like how he's improving in his own life outside of soccer.
For sure.
Right? Once people know that they are noticed and they're recognized for their presence,
Yes.
not their contributions, their presence, they want to share their story or whatever tidbit of their story. There's no pulling. There's no they just want to share.
Yeah. Yeah. I've found that as an asset as well from my perspective. I started mowing yards and stuff like that at 13. And then at 15, my dad had a collapsed lung and had to have surgery on it. And he was out of work for 9 months. And on a mechanic's salary, it's not.
It was devastating.
Yeah, it's not an easy livelihood. So I kind of had to start looking, for somehow to make some more money than what I was with my yard jobs. And I had an older friend that was working at Tubby's. And for the audience that's outside of the Midwest, Tubby's is kind of like Jersey Mike's.
I haven't heard that in forever. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I knew exactly when you said that.
Yeah. Went to work for Tubby's, or tried to anyways. And when they interviewed me, they were going to hire me. And he took a last glance at what my birth date was. And he was like, "Oh, you're not 16 yet." And I'm like, "No." He's like, "I can't hire you today." I'm like, "Oh, crap."
Yeah.
It's like, "But as soon as you turn 16,
Come on back. Yeah.
I'll hire you." And sure enough, he did. Ended up working for them for 9 years. By the time I stopped working for him. I was training franchisees
Yeah.
uh, at the store that I was running. And just that connection of work and earning money and also interacting with people in that process of working, it gives you a whole different perspective on how to interact with the world when you're out in the world. Because you're, especially at Tubby's, it was all customer service scenario
Oh, and
related.
that's rapid fire. I mean, I have worked in coffee shops. It's almost like mandatory military service. I think actually people should be mandated to work in a restaurant
Yeah, yeah,
because every table is a different opportunity to learn how to communicate with people that are not like you. And if you can do that over time, yes, you'll make money, but really the bigger lesson is understanding really sort of the uniqueness, the different sort of machinations of personalities and how people interact. You just learn so much. It's like you have this unofficial degree in interpersonal relationships that can serve you for a long time.
yes,
Right? And in a world where we're going, whatever's being developed right now with AI, just in our conversation and the time we've been talking, I mean, we are fast approaching a world where the only thing we're going to have, the only currency we're going to have is our story.
exactly.
And it's not going to be, what if we're in a world where people aren't working, you know? And if that's the case, then they're going to have to start to figure out how to communicate with one another. Otherwise, life's going to get really boring and stagnant. And I go back to those times of working in restaurants, and every table was different, and every night was different. And you won some, you lost some.
Yeah,
You didn't read something right, or you thought, you know what? I think they're the kind of table that doesn't want any talking from me. They just want to know that in essence, they don't even have to say that they need something. I recognize they need something before they ask for it. And that
yeah,
subtlety is what makes them say at the end, wow, the service was good tonight. The value of silence, the value of understanding and listening to people in a noisy world, literally, in a noisy restaurant. So some of the best training ever. You did it on when you've got someone coming in that quick, they're there to get in and out. It's how do you convey professionalism? How do you convey your ability to read the situation?
yeah,
That's what means everything. And like you, when I go into a coffee shop, sadly, I typically have an opinion right away on how it's
for sure.
going because I took pride in understanding these people had a place to go.
Yeah,
And it's not that they're on my time, I'm on their time as the
yeah,
employee. And sadly, too many times I walk in thinking, wow, this is just not, this could be so much better. Maybe that's the German in me and like sort of this precision approach to
well,
life.
I think it's that observation and perception from early age, picking up on cues that not everybody does. Just to your point of dealing with people coming in and needing to get back out fast, I was able to assess in that short amount of time as well whether they're having a bad day or a good day, whether it was urgent that they needed to get that order and get it out of fast because they only had a half an hour for lunch, or if they had more time, they saw that they were a little bit more relaxed. But those social cues that you pick up on because of being the observer to being the one who's not fully engaged in speaking from the start, but paying attention to everything that's going on. Um,
It can mean, I think it can make or break situations being able to read the room. Like when I interviewed Damon John of Shark Tank, I'm in a room, I'm going to meet him, I've prepared, I traveled across country, and all of a sudden I find out that he's in a very bad mood.
eh,
Well, that's not what you want to hear right before they tell you the lights, camera, let's go, And, but I had to read the moment and I had to give him a different experience. And I think that goes back to sometimes it's not just about acquiescing or sort of giving into someone else's energy or what they're doing, and maybe they're irritated or whatever's going on, but it's giving them such a different experience right out of the chute that helps shake them from that sort of the fencing that they're stuck behind emotionally because of something else that's going on. And that's typically why people might be rude in a public setting, or they might be dismissive, or they might,
Right.
not be sort of forgiving of other people's efforts and energy that you just might not be mapping to. But yeah, that was a great example where I just thought, wow, he doesn't know this, but I'm going to have to dial back into my world years ago where I came upon a table that was not happy even before I got there. And now I've got to change. I've got to flip it for them. So they walk out of here saying, oh man, I went in not in a good mood, but that was a very good experience and food was great and whatever. It was all good. So that's the thing, right? You never know how the lessons of youth are going to then play out or express themselves when we're older.
For sure.
But I think that if we've done ourselves justice at some point in time, we've taken stock in some of those tougher times when we didn't want to be bagging groceries for 8 hours on a Saturday going, my back hurts and I'm only 14. This is ridiculous, you know, because it comes full circle. And when shortages are there at the grocery store and they don't have anyone to bag, it's like, I'm going to bag my own groceries because I'm going to do it. And I'm going to be thoughtful about that and know that if I'm just 1 out of 10 that does it, maybe that cashier at least help them get through that half of their shift.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. As you're nearing the end of high school, you got your jobs, you're playing sports. Are you thinking that you may go off to college on a scholarship, or is that even in play at all? Or are you starting to have ideas about what you think you might want to go into?
No, I didn't think about scholarships because again, for me, I could do well in school, but that didn't mean that it wasn't a competitive landscape that I was trying to like crush as if I was on an athletic field. It just had a different. Now, obviously the kids that did, they were able to cash in literally on those scholarships. So that wasn't a part of the calculus for me. I just was ready to get out into the world.
Okay.
Right. Because I think the one price you pay in a serious environment when you're growing up and you're spending more time around people that are older is that you feel as if you're trapped in this childhood because you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Right. You've seen the world through different eyes. You've been around serious conversations. You have seen a side of adults that maybe others don't because you're so curious and everybody wants to share their story. Right. You know, and so I was just ready to hit the ground running, whatever the heck that meant. I just knew that I was out of this sort of, rat race of what you had to do. Because once you graduated high school, it was like, oh, I can, in theory, pursue the things that I want to pursue. And to me, I didn't know it then, but I would say looking back, that's that one window where you do have an opportunity. Now, this does not speak to today's, I think, environment for young people, but back then it was like, am I going to bet on myself? Right. And that was like the big question. Can I bet on myself? Because if I'm betting on myself, then I'm taking school loans out and I, hope with my teenage brain that I can figure out what that's going to mean later on. Right. What are the implications of that? And that's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around. So no, I wanted to go. I was ready to go. I didn't care about graduation. To me was just like a bump in the road. Let's go.
Okay. And what was your key decision for deciding to go to Michigan State? Because
Well, yeah, I started off at Columbia College in Chicago, which now is a very big, if you go, last time I was in Chicago, I could not believe how many buildings they owned and were part of the campus downtown Chicago. But I went there for media and all my professors were like producers of the show Dateline, like in real time. So your professors were people that were actively in television. Pat Sajak went there, the Wheel of Fortune host. And so that was super important for me because my initial dream was to be on 60 Minutes. Funny enough, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, well, I was fascinated with, I did some different experiences that transitioned during high school and beyond that, where I had a teacher that had, seen something in me, whatever, and had me join this sort of after school nonprofit group that helped other kids.
Okay.
And because I was quote unquote the kid that never got in trouble, that was there to help out and volunteer, I was sort of a good candidate. He was pivotal for me because he pushed me. He saw something in me, he pushed me. he would say, I think you need to put together a presentation the next time we go to a school. I think you need to basically keynoting, but as a teenager.
Oh, wow.
So I started going around schools in Metro Detroit, and I was speaking in front of like 700 kids that were either older than me or my age.
Wow.
So I went begrudgingly and did it, but there was such a power because it made me feel more human. That's the funny thing. Even though I was there, but I was writing it all. It was my take on what it meant to be a young person and sort of our relationship with self-esteem. The role we played is really what I was talking about. I didn't really know it then. But so that changed my idea of what I could do. Like, how should I think about this? How, is the aperture, like, is the lens sort of minimal and closed off, or am I widening that aperture to a sort of a bigger, broader horizon of opportunity? And so the media played a role in that, because I had been editor of my newspaper in school, and writing was something that I could do. I didn't like at that time, funny enough, but I could do it. And so, yeah, that's why I was so ready to go, because I'd had these experiences. I mean, I was 17 and I was getting paid and flight around. I'd get flown to different places to speak. And so, you make money, you are treated with respect. Like what teenage, when they're asking me, like, is that hotel okay for you? Like, of course it is. What do I care, right? But all of those experiences, they supported this bigger sort of vision that I had of the world that was much, like the world was not small to me. I don't mean that as like I had the opportunity to do something in it, but just it sure as heck was a lot bigger than the campus of high school for me. And so that's where I was just driven to. And really, being a young adult in college, I was even more serious. You go to Michigan State, you don't get to I didn't go to one basketball game. I went to one football game, and I graduated early. That just meant that I was taking 20 credits in the summer. I was working. I was a man on a mission, because I was always battling time in a way that was not forced upon me. But when you're younger, trying to live in an older world, you look at a clock in a very different way. It's like, it's not 60 seconds in a minute. It feels like that's 2 minutes worth, and you got to speed up, and you've got to sort of make those seconds count. So yeah, getting out of high school just meant, okay, we're going to supercharge this. We're going to downshift here and take that corner like we know we can, right?
Yeah.
And so that was, but I will say, Rich, that I think for any young person, I wouldn't recommend that, right? I mean, that's been my story, but I should have had maybe a more full, expansive understanding and relationship with time, where I gave myself a little bit more grace to, I don't know, watch the world around me without a plan. Yeah. Sometimes not having a plan is actually a much bigger part of the plan than what we can consciously put together in any given moment or sequence in our lives. So I wouldn't recommend it in that way. There's no badge of honor that I didn't get to enjoy, that I didn't enjoy college in the way so many others didn't. Now, I know plenty of people that enjoyed college maybe a little too much, and will then say to me, man, I just wish I would have had a little bit more focus, and who knows how things would have changed. Yeah. So I get it. There's no perfect, right? You're threading a needle no matter what. Nobody has a blueprint. Nobody has a script that they can go by. Context changes, time changes, the economy changes, all these things change for people. I mean, we're talking now as the U.S. is at war with Iran, and there are students that were studying overseas that had to leave. I've been to Dubai a few times, and I saw a student on the news who had to get up and leave and come back to the U.S., who was there on sort of a study abroad. Well, his timeline has shifted greatly. So we're all victims of sort of that current circumstance in that manner. Yeah, but if I had to do it over again, I'd probably have a little bit more fun.
Okay.
I would, stop and smell the roses just a little bit.
Right.
Because you start to create this cycle of like, well, if I just keep working hard, these things are going to happen. And if they happen, then, well, I can't stop or slow down, because then I'll lose opportunities I didn't even know were out there.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're fighting a ghost.
For sure. And it's interesting that you have that reflection at this point, because at that point in time, for us here in Michigan, Michigan State was the party school. That versus
I know.
versus Michigan
Yeah, don't tell anybody, right?
being the more intellectual. So it's fascinating to hear you say I went there and I even graduated early because
I
you
didn't
just
attend one party, Rich. I was serious as a heart attack.
yeah, that's completely different than what I experienced from the other kids that were working with me at Tubby's that were going to Michigan State, and they would come back and be telling me stories, and it was like, do you guys even go to class?
Right. I know. Like, yeah. What are you paying for?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What was the decision to switch being at school in Chicago to coming back to Michigan and changing completely into a different field of study?
See, it wasn't that far afield for me at all
Okay.
because I started having experiences when I was speaking where I would connect with people and it's a very interesting thing. You know, you connect with someone, they have an emotional response to whatever you've shared, and then you get on a plane and you leave.
Yeah.
And I think if you are human, you have a sense of that didn't feel great. Like in one sense, you're happy that you were successful because you connected with someone or a group
Mhm.
of people, but just to get up and leave feels,
Yeah.
like emotionally rude or something. And so I wanted to learn more about, I always felt like I had a pretty good radar of the people in the rooms that I was in. And it was like, well, let me get the master class on that. Let's dive into that because if I have a proclivity for understanding and reading the temperature of a room, then maybe this can just be a way for me to continue to develop, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and eventually, and then here's the flip of it, right? I didn't really have dreams that I was going to have my own sort of office and practice in mental health in that regard.
Okay.
Because I knew plenty of people that had gotten their doctorates and had done their clinicals and went on and applied it in so many different ways. Business
Right.
world, it did, all over the nonprofits. So I always felt like that was going to be more me. But I do know that I wouldn't have been able to do over 4,000 interviews if I hadn't gone through all of that
Got you.
because that helped me. It was an extension of waiting tables. It was an extension of bagging groceries. It was an extension of being in someone's personal space where you're loading a tree into the back of their truck. And that's their little life on four wheels.
Right.
Those sorts of things you add them up and you say, okay, now we're just going to organize that and you're going to spend time with people and you're going to learn their stories and help to understand what it is that is preventing them from feeling whole and or fully engaging with the life around them. And so that was just incredibly important for me as a culmination of those interests in just humans so that when I interview people, I'm just genuinely curious in ways that I think a lot of people are fearful of going because they don't know. They don't know if they're going to ask something that is appropriate, disrespectful, or if they have what's the response going to be? And that's the power of podcasts for people now, right? So people can start their own shows and they can start to understand what it's like to have to command and direct along the lazy river of a conversation
Yeah.
and to read those tea leaves and know, okay, I didn't plan for this, kind of where we're headed, right? This is what's the next part of this discussion. And I think that's a powerful skill to have for whatever people do.
For sure. For sure. Once you graduate and you're graduating early, what is the first opportunity in terms of job positioning do you step into? Is it
Nothing.
your own thing?
The
Nothing.
void. Nothing.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's when I moved out to Los Angeles because I was tired of, I'd heard back then, I don't know if who knows if it stands true today, but that like Detroit at that point I heard something like the third cloudiest city in the US, like more cloudy day,
Liz?
and I went driving down M59 or 94, whatever, any of these, right? Thinking,
Yeah.
I kind of need a break from this. When you're already serious and you already see the world in pretty just literal, in a very literal sense of things to some degree, you kind of want the sunshine. So I just packed up and said, I don't know what I'm going to learn on this journey, but I'm going to go live in Los Angeles for a bit.
Okay.
And and push myself in a way where you get a bit of a do-over. I mean, that's the beauty of when you graduate or you move on from these life experiences. You get a bit of it's maybe not a do-over, but you get a chance to recast yourself using the story metaphor. You get a chance to recast yourself in the light that hopefully more accurately represents really the true, authentic you. Because you're not just a kid who's having to follow the rules of a parent or a household or any of these things. You know, you can kind of change the sort of the clothes of your personality in some ways. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's what LA did for me. I'm not a huge fan of LA in general, but I've met some of my dearest friends and had some of the most pivotal, consequential experiences of my life living there.
Okay.
That I know have aided, where I am now. I mean, life, everything's hindsight, right? Hindsight is 20/20, but that I wanted to get out of, I didn't want to be one of those people in my head. I had a negative connotation. It's not fair at all, but in my head, it was the people that I knew that sort of stuck around and stayed wherever they grew up. For whatever reason, I think it's because my father traveled around the world that I just in my head went, well, you got to you have to pick up and leave. You can't always stay in the same port because you're not going to really fully experience this time we have, for better or for worse, right? I know that's not sort of a fair assessment on people and opportunities and resource at all. I knew too many people, and my mother's from a very small town in Indiana, and it was like it just seemed as if everybody stayed there. Yeah. And I, in my own head, had a negative connotation to that, fair or foul, right? And so, no, it was like, I can do this. I worked enough. I saved up my money. I'm driving cross country, found a roommate, and let's see where this takes me.
Yeah, I had one opportunity to go out to California. It was in 2014. It was for an artist conference that I went to out in Orange County, and I remember just stepping out into the air from the doors of the airport. And I was like, oh, wow.
This is different.
This is different. Yeah, exactly. And it's, to that point of you saying what it's like here in Michigan, especially during the fall, winter months, it's gray and gloomy most of the time. And realizing it was just shifting energies even.
Oh, yeah.
Just stepping into that air, the energy of that air was so much lighter. It felt like you could breathe a little bit. So I understand that definitely, of wanting to make that transition, that long distance travel journey, because you're right. It almost seems like a Midwestern mentality for quite a few, that if you grow up here, this is your home, and
you stay
with it. Yeah. Stay and stick with it.
But I think that's human nature in a lot of ways. Look, it's funny because I have great affection for the Nordics, and I've spent a lot of time in Sweden and in Norway, and yet they live in an environment where it's like completely dark, right? For months. Yeah. Those that have resources travel multiple times during the winter so they get their vitamin D and, but I understand at some level the steely-eyed look you might get up there. I recognize that, right? Maybe it's the Germanic sort of blood. But I understand that feeling, and I want it out of that. I want when you're a young person, and it's like, okay, I want to see how life would be different if I. Now it was also a bit mind bending because there were times when you'd get frustrated. You'd wake up and think, is it 4th of July? Is it Thanksgiving? Because every day was the same.
Yeah.
The weather was always the same, and I was used to seasons.
Right.
So look, the benefit, again, in hindsight, was that you start to then appreciate the things that you just were sort of like clockwork. Oh, it's Halloween time. Why do I know that? It's this time. It's that, when you don't have those sort of biorhythms clicking in the same way, it can be disconcerting. So you learn a little bit more about feeling uncomfortable in these places. And I definitely have used that muscle in environments that are completely foreign, literally and figuratively, to what I have known when I've been in the middle of nowhere on the African continent. And 99.9% of people would not be there with me, right? It's just, but I hearken back to those days where you just feel completely like a fish out of water, and you're not, you're in that body of water
Yeah.
for the next whatever period of time.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned being out in California, you had a few key pivotal moments that were really profound for you. Can you touch on one of those for us to just get a little bit of understanding of how that shifted some things for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of friends. I mean, I just interviewed my former roommate, a guy who's now the head of U.S. production for a very famous Hollywood studio that was my roommate for a few years in L.A. So I had a bunch of people that I knew in that world.
Okay.
But that's the world where I really dove even deeper into my studies in psychology. And I ended up, my clinicals were out there. I was at King Drew Medical Center, which is where it's right near where the Rodney King, the riots happened in Watts and Compton. And those experiences where you're in a different environment, but you're in a different environment for a lot of different reasons, right? For safety reasons, you had to leave the hospital before dusk for
Mhm.
safety. Yet we're in an environment where there was no investment in those cities. You couldn't find banks. You would see fencing around a McDonald's, and you just go, okay, how are we helping our fellow man, our fellow citizen in this way? Like, how would this play out in the suburbs of Detroit where I grew up, right? I don't think it would play very well because we're all human in that manner. So those moments of just some really crazy, different experiences around people that were suffering greatly and things that you think are only happening in movies that are actually really happening. Those are
Yeah.
pivotal because you start to learn, you work with you work with people that are suicidal. You have to, you have to be very mindful. You have to be very present with folks that are suffering at that kind of level. You have to be able to ask them about their plan, all these sorts of things that you would never think of asking. It just isn't part of the general public. But you do so because it sends a message to people that you're there for them in that moment and you can handle it. Metaphorically, they can hand you their stressors, the things that are really holding them down from breathing, really. And you can do so in a way that gives them the freedom to be able to think in some level, right? At some level. And when you have those experiences, you're changed forever because at that point, a question is just like if I ask someone a question who's a celebrity I'm not worried about the consequences of just being curious because I've been in conversations that are highly consequential for people and their families. And it does change something about your DNA.
All right.
And so, yeah, then when I think about the pivotal moments in LA, that's absolutely front and center for me are those experiences where I would have gone in thinking only in the movies. And you go, nope. I've been in some very, very dark environments that ultimately, made me feel more human, connected me even more to myself because you're aware that the world is not just what you experience. There's so many shades of gray, for better or for worse. And I hope that just for me, I feel like it made me more appreciative in that way so that I could sit in the moments, right? Like that was my subtitle. It took a long time coming up with the subtitle with my book because I didn't want to waste that real estate. When it hit me about meeting the moment, I was like, you know what, that's actually it. And I could only meet the moment and slow the world down in front of me if I had been in previous experiences that I didn't have a choice. I had to slow down. I had to, at a micro level, understand what was going on with someone who had a traumatic brain injury who also was living on Skid Row that all of a sudden I'm assessing right now.
Right.
You don't have time you're not building relationship in that moment. You're trying to evaluate to help support that individual that may not have social supports or family support. That's when life becomes serious as a heart attack.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. At what point did you make the decision to put down roots in Nashville and start working with Vanderbilt?
Well, and that was, I mean, Vanderbilt was just one of several different groups that I worked with. And so that was working with them on a yearly basis, which was really nice because it was like, you know, sort of circle the sun one more year and you're back on campus kind of a thing. I'd come to Nashville several times because of my father's work and what he had done here with General Motors. Because I had a new appreciation for the Four Seasons by living in LA. I wanted something that where I could still see green grass and potentially seasons.
Yeah.
And yet not also have the winters that I grew up with. So this was a sort of a nice happy middle. And that really wasn't a hard decision for me. And economically in California, most of my friends, if not all of them, were a minimum of like 7 to 8 years older than me. And they were still struggling at that point in their lives to be able to afford a home because of the prices.
Oh, wow.
In Los Angeles. And I was like, yeah, I think this is the point where it's like someone who's, you know, playing blackjack that just says, I had a couple of good hands. Maybe I should just get up because somehow the house always wins. I know I heard that somewhere, right? Willie Nelson sang a song somewhere. And so I just kind of said, I'm going to take my lessons with me and head here. So, yeah, so it was really nothing more complicated than that.
When you started to think about putting this book together, The Narrative Edge, I find the title of it very, very interesting, especially from a marketing and branding standpoint, because a lot of what our conversation has been today has been about the edge that you and I both share from that perspective of being the observer. Many of our experiences have put us in a position where we've had to be the observer or adapt because of being the observer, or the ability to observe quickly and adapt. And that's an edge that we have that not everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to craft a narrative edge, what is the thought process of all of the interviews and experiences that you've had over all of these years? And it's a tremendous amount, over 4,000. What did you start to see as that narrative edge that you wanted to convey to people about telling their story?
First and foremost is that their story matters, which I think is important. I say that ad nauseum across the book because I think it's the kind of thing where we would just assume that that's the case, but the minute you tell somebody that, you see a physical change in them.
Yeah.
That you mean my story, my experience matters. And if my experience and my story matters, then that means I matter, right? So you start to do this deductive reasoning of like, whoa, okay. And I'd rather spend time with people that think I matter than not, right? And in doing so, you start to ask yourself questions. And I talk about sort of the classic from an American perspective, that elementary school where the cafeteria is also it doubles as the theater for an elementary school with the stage, right? And in those types of experiences, sometimes in life, we're the oak tree that doesn't move on the stage. Sometimes we're the hero, sometimes we're the villain, sometimes we're the character that we just can't connect with. And sometimes we're not even on the stage. Sometimes we're in the back of the audience. And when that happens, when we can start to ask ourselves that, because we're in the pursuit of understanding our story, we start to have an appreciation for the other characters. We have an appreciation for the different sequences of the story that have impacted us in ways that we couldn't have seen then. But now as we stack them together, we go, you know what? That was meaningful. And maybe I didn't appreciate it then, but I sure do appreciate it now. And I think just the acknowledgement of that starts to give you the edge to say, you know what? I need to really own, because I asked that question. It's like, if you're not in control of your own story, Rich, then who is? And,
Absolutely.
And when I asked that, for me, it was a bit of, when I was writing that, I didn't even think twice about it. But it's funny because in all the interviews I've done, that's the one question that they've responded to that, because it makes them actually think. Because, and you break it down, it's like some people are incredibly confident and they feel that they have relative command of their narrative, let's say in the workplace, but they don't because they're in a dysfunctional home or relationship. And so those roles get reversed or they get sort of neutralized at some level. Or it's the inverse of that, right? You feel confident in your ability to be there at home with your family, but in the work environment, for whatever reason, you just never feel like you can be anything other than that oak tree. Like you're sort of stuck in the
Yeah.
muck and the mud of life in a story that just does not propel forward, right? Where you're like, I want to turn the page, but I can never, for whatever reason, it just won't turn. And so that narrative edge is the acknowledgement that we all play different roles at different points in our lives. We're not subjected to playing one role our whole life. And sometimes we have to understand and appreciate that we don't need to be on that stage. Sometimes being stage left or stage right, in the orchestra or in the audience, or being the usher at the door is actually really, really valuable in understanding the way in which we interact with people and the way in which we can re-author or author our future in a way that's different than today.
Yeah, absolutely. For creatives that are out there, a lot of times the creative mind does not want to be front and center, but it's very much a key scenario for them to be able to share and tell their story in order to get people to engage with them as the creative versus just their work. When you're talking to creatives with your coaching and you start to address that type of a scenario, what is one of the things that you convey to them of why it's important for them to drop a little bit of that apprehension about being up front and letting people really see who they are versus what they've created?
Well, I would say that it wouldn't even be exclusive to creatives in that regard. I would actually apply
Sure.
this to most people, if not all, to some level. It's all about, it goes back to, it's the acknowledgement of it, right? Like the thing with creatives, and I'm one of them, we're all of different strokes, right? And in different backgrounds. And we see things through either bright colors in canvases or in clay that we mold or in audio that we enhance and edit, right? All these different ways. Or the keystrokes of a book that you're writing, a manuscript, is it's the voice, right? To me, it is the voice. So like in the publishing world, they're not going to look at you unless they say that, okay, you know what, you found your voice. And to me, I've applied that across all the creatives that I've ever known in all these different disciplines, whether it's Broadway and my sister was on Broadway, or it's my friends that have been in film or in like behind the scenes or art. Finding your voice, you know it because it's the equivalent of being in the zone as an athlete.
Yes.
And you know it, and it's the thing that if you can actually describe it quite well, you might be challenged to actually find that is your true talent, because I think it's the kind of thing that is so like nebulous. It's hard to wrap your head around. You just know in that moment when you are in that flow state. And you are interpreting what's in your mind's eye in a way that can be expressed in the physical world. Yeah. And that's only going to come when you are, I think, authentic to what it is that makes you feel creative and doing more of that. Like one thing that I've learned through the years, it's funny because I'll have people say, this will be in very sort of tangible terms, Rich, but you know, in the beginning, like when I would podcast, where people would go, well, why don't you just focus on one type of guest, you know? And I was very intentional because in my head, it was like humans are not just one thing. They're this amalgamation of all these different experiences and cultures and practices and pitfalls and summits, you know, that we've raised our hand and said that we've accomplished something that's all fits together. And I'm going to learn if I interview someone over here who's a minister of education in England, and then I interview somebody over here that is an inventor, let's say, or some innovator of some sort, or an investor. It doesn't matter. I'm applying all of those different experiences in one. And that is what allows me then to really act as if I'm a part of a jazz ensemble. And I think art is about being some level of an ensemble across jazz.
Yeah.
It's that free association, that freedom to be able to respond to the rhythm of life and just use the tools that you have. Like if for some reason and I'm not, but let's say I was really good at illustrations, it would be that whatever it is that's stimulating my mind is allowing me then to interpret that world around me through the art of illustration in a way that communicates and connects with people, right? It's not the objective. It's the secondary benefit of being an artist and being creative, is that other people connect with that flow state that you were in when you created whatever that was or that is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for me, I mean, that's why, if anything, I've been much more conscious over the last several years, over the last decade for sure, in paying attention to all the things that make me feel creative. Music, movies, documentaries, paintings, and knowing that, no, I'm not just like watching this or attending this concert or whatever it is that I'm doing. This is an experience. This cultural experience this will play out somewhere. I don't know where, but it will, because I've opened that up as a possibility in my mind. And I didn't do that forever, but over the last easily decade, I've been very, very active in my mind to say, what is it like? Why is it that this movie speaks to me in this way? Like, actually think about that, because that will play out in the way in which I like to be creative. And I think that most people can do that. And you find that because when I work with people that want me to help them find their story, whether that is to help them write their book or whatever it is going to be, that sort of that output, I find that they just get even more sort of entrenched, because there's this permission structure of sorts that allows them to free associate all these different elements and to test out these theories of like, well, wait a minute, that I never knew it then, but witnessing what I did in 1978, that potentially was really pivotal, because I don't think it's an accident that I ended up doing this and that, right? So I think creativity is an expression. It's a way to tap into humanity, and we just have different ways that we're naturally, I think, talented. And if we find that, hopefully, we then can refine that over time to the point where, like, was silly lucky that publishers reached out to me wanting me to write a book. So I know that I'm fortunate in that way. But I'd like to think it's because I was authentic in the storytelling I had done.
Yeah.
And that they recognized that and went, we want a piece of whatever that is.
For sure.
Because I wasn't doing it for someone else. I was doing it because I felt like in the moment that was the question that needed to be asked. This was the story that needed to be portrayed. The silence was important in that take. It's even more important than the words that were spoken. So we need to keep it in, or we need to,
One of the key things that you just said, key words actually, that you just said that people need is permission. They need to know that they have permission to tell their story, because it's essential. It's essential that we hear varied perspectives, varied experiences. If we don't, it becomes that scenario of being caught in the Midwest and thinking that that's the only place that is anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't understand what it's like to be in Nashville on a Friday night and Broadway is literally packed like Pine Knob would be on a Friday night.
Old Pine Knob, yes.
That type of a scenario where you get to experience something on a different level, different color. And it's not just all people that live in Nashville. It's people from all over that are coming to Nashville to experience Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to hear those stories that people have in order to better understand. And I think I always have a tendency to say this when it comes to issues in society where people have strong and hard and fastened opinions that they just stick in because they think that is the only thing. It's because they don't understand anything other than that. And if stories don't get to them, then they're just going to stay stuck. So if we have more of an understanding based on people telling multitudes of stories, my hope is that some of that will start to fade and drop off of people.
I agree. Stories, I think, can be sort of the lubricator for relationships to like propel forward, right?
Yeah.
It's a parent sharing a story with a child that's going through something challenging at school. You're sharing your experience of when you were their age, and that moves them just a little bit further to know, a little bit closer to saying, I'm okay. This is normal. Or my parent went through that. Like, it advances so much, right? It's around story. When you're in a difficult situation or negotiation, typically story is what comes up, so
Right.
story is everywhere, and it's in everything, and it's everywhere. That's the beauty of it. And thankfully now it feels like we're at a point where people are starting to pay attention even more. I think recently LinkedIn came out. There was a thing that like the number one job that people are looking for or that businesses are searching for are storytellers.
Yeah.
Because communication is changing. Everything's getting automated. And at some point they're saying we've got to have that individual, that creative that can capture the essence. In the old days and whatever, but like years ago, that was the advertising, that was the marketing, that was the PR, the publicist, it was the social media. But now it's like, well, we need to understand the ethos of what we're doing here. That's the story. That's
Yeah.
the sentiment, right?
Yeah. Do you find in any form that AI may be a disruptor in the storytelling, or is it or can it be a tool in the storytelling?
I think both things can be true.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So, on one sense, I mean, I see this. I get excited when I think, wow, I can think now about illustrations in ways I wouldn't because I don't have that natural talent. But I sure as heck can put in information about what I want, the sensibility. Like I'm working on my field guide to the narrative edge so that you can take me with you, if you will,
Oh,
and work on your own story.
very
And
cool.
in that, every chapter, I have I love stick figures. And so I have these drawings that came from my inputs into the technology to give me images that reflected what I was searching for, reaching for that based on that chapter of the field guide, right? So in that sense, you say, wow, I never would have thought that I could eventually do something where like I envision myself at some point in the near future working on very short documentaries. We're talking under 10 minutes where there's a concept of humanity that's told through voiceover and script with animation that is something that can be developed right from my laptop. That's really exciting to me because it makes the sort of the world, the canvas of storytelling open up. Now, on the other side of the coin, I think the challenge is for those that are, and it's nobody's fault. I mean, you're the age you are, you grew up, you were born when you were. It's that I'm lucky that I went through enough. I've gone through enough in my life that has given me enough enough tread has been taken off the wheel
Yeah.
to where I understand where that tread was left.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it gives me in my own head a little bit of, it kind of endorses that I've been there. I can relate on some level to almost anybody's story to some degree because I'm human and I'm of a certain age, right? That I don't know if younger people are going to have the same experience, sadly, because, I mean, it's like 70 or 80% of high school kids are using AI to complete their homework now, I think I saw recently. And that just means that one of the things that they're doing and automating is the stories or the way in which they are looking at narrative prose to answer something in an English lit class or whatever.
Yeah.
And all that does is prevent them from the grinding of what makes a story a story. And so, yeah, I think both things hold true.
Do you think that your trip to see your grandmother at 9 was the start of your storytelling journey?
I would say if it's not, it's as sure as a contender. Because I don't know if I would be able to put a fine point on what would have been the sort of the start. Um, but it's a very, very, I think, fair and deft look from your perspective on my story to be able to pull that out. I think probably if I had to, I would have to say, just because of purely like how young I was when I was exposed to these things, would have been those Sunday nights watching 60 Minutes.
Okay.
Because literally within that 60-minute window, I was transported to, I mean, we're
All
talking about war in Iran right now, but I remember being so young that when we're talking about Iran-Contra and all these different things, like hostages, like I'm watching that at an age you're probably not supposed to, and I'm soaking it in, right? And I'm picking up on nuance when someone's interviewing somebody of a very different culture and they are asking for permission to ask a question that's not an easy question. And I'm just zoned in on the body language and all of that. So I think the curiosity definitely from that. And then I think that then spirals into films that I would have watched when I was young that were like international films, or
okay. Right.
most like 8-year-olds are not watching something that comes on. It's The French Connection with Gene Hackman or something like from the, it's just,
Yeah.
so I think those experiences, you start to pile them up and add them up and you're like, okay, it's like collecting pennies and you go, are you kidding me? I have how much? So yeah, I'm sure that played a role for sure because it put me in environments that I could only have previously thought of in my mind and maybe looking at a black and white photo, and those things can be important. But I wouldn't have seen the value of that trip if I hadn't had all those previous experiences about understanding the power of silence, moments that are close between two people in a conversation that just happens to be broadcast around the world.
Yeah. That's what I was picking up from the storyline of today's conversation was you've had so many different angles to be able to view from across the world, whether it's Africa or Germany or California in the States to back to Nashville, Midwest. That type of diverse experience of an environment firsthand, it creates this sense of understanding that's different from somebody who's never traveled anywhere outside of their home base.
Totally agree, but I would want to just make sure to acknowledge that, I understand the luck that I've had and I've worked very hard. I've never been given sort of a free pass on anything to be able to do and travel. Like I've made those opportunities happen in that way.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of fantastically talented people that have not had the circumstance to be able to leverage different experiences in that way that I've been able to. And so, because that's important to me, right? There's so many talent. There are more talented people that haven't been given opportunities than the people that we think are talented. So, right.
No, exactly.
And that's just important because that to me comes around. That's equality. That's understanding. Just this world is not a one size fits all.
No.
And
No,
yet, for whatever reason, we're during a period of time in human history where we're actually fighting against that to say that it should be a one size fits all. And all I think that is exclusionary and impacts all the wonderful things that make us human, right? And so, but I can only speak from that because I've also been very lucky to have experiences where I have been in environments where I'm like the only white face that a young African child has seen. You can't put into words what those experiences are. They're not a bucket list, but they're defining portrait of a life hopefully lived well with intention.
For sure.
And so, yeah, I would love for everybody to have those experiences, even for 5 minutes, to just go, wow, I'm a part of something much bigger.
Absolutely. And to your point of, not everybody is afforded an opportunity or potential to go and travel as much as you may have had. But that also has its own unique value because of their personal perspective. And I think that plays into what your whole mission is about storytelling, is that it doesn't take away from the fact that they haven't traveled because they have their own experiences that are unique.
That's right.
And valued to themselves. And those are things that we need to hear of as well. Because everything in and of itself has a different perspective. It's like you said, it's not one size fits all here. Too many people try to put it into that mold. And me personally, I know of just from the mental health journey, there's been plenty of times that I've walked into a doctor's office and they've been like, here, we're going to give you this, or this, and do this or that. And it's like, you haven't even had enough conversation with me to know what my experiences are.
Yeah.
You're just immediately going off of a list of applicable.
Yeah, that's emblematic of people feeling like they're living a life as a barcode.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Right. I think this is a fantastic place to be able to close out today. Truly do appreciate you coming on and taking the time and sharing your story about storytelling and your lived experience and some of the similarities that we have growing up in Michigan, but venturing outside and learning different things. One of the things that I always want to remind the audience at the end of one of these episodes, and it's even more so today, I want to reflect back on Rod's story here, to be curious, to be inquisitive, to pay attention to what's going on around you, but always listen to your heart and definitely be kind to your mind.